This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 218 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with Carol Connare, the Old Farmer's Almanac editor-in-chief, about using the almanac in garden planning. The plant profile is on Stokes Aster, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events and this week's garden tasks in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on the cranberry debate from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Carol Connare. She is the editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac. Welcome, Carol.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Kathy.
Great to have you. So we should say that the original Farmer's Almanac is one of its other names, and also the Robert E. Thomas Almanac, but we'll get into all of that and the history and how many editions you've had and how your lineage fits into the rest of the editors of the Almanac. But before we get into all of that, Carol, we like to ask our guests here at the GardenDC podcast, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb?
Yes, I was. I'm from New Hampshire, where I returned to start this job at the Almanac last year. And it's my home turf. My mom was a really big gardener, though I will say that my mom and my sister were both green thumbs and a lot of house plants. And so from a very early age, vegetables became my thing to be a little different.
So are you still a big vegetable grower?
I am a big vegetable grower. As I said, I recently moved back to my home state and I lucked out. I got this incredible property through a friend, really a private sale of a permaculture orchard, a food forest, if you will. And so I do have my annual vegetable garden, but all new plants to me, things like pawpaw and aronia berries, and then also gooseberries, your regulars like the blueberries and raspberries, pears, sour cherry. So those are all new things for me. And I feel like any gardener should treat every year like being a beginner, but boy, that's been my story this year.
Wow, and so fortunate to have all those fruit-producing plants. So I imagine you were harvesting a lot this year.
Yes, I'm still harvesting autumn olives. Those are my last, and pawpaws. Pawpaw, if you don't know them, do you know pawpaw?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're very cool. So, but they ripen kind of one at a time, and so you have to be out there looking for them day by day.
Yeah. So let's share with our listeners, since you are back in New Hampshire, a little bit about your growing climate and zone, since you're a bit outside our mostly mid-Atlantic audience.
Yes. Well, technically my home is in 5A, though it really operates more like a 5B. And I moved from a 6B, so just a little different here and there. And as you and your listeners probably know, those hardiness zones were all changed this year, and half the country ended up in a half warmer zone. So that's kind of interesting stuff. But yeah, we have a true winter here, though, with the longer growing season that we've all been seeing with the warming, is able to get those second crops in around here. Like greens can go later that aren't that are not too tender to survive that first couple of frosts.
And how is the soil? Is it very rocky or sandy or clay?
Well, where I work, it's pretty great. It's loamy. I live right next to a brook, and we're in really a river valley. The Connecticut River Valley goes all the way to the ocean from northern New England. And so, and funny enough, I used to live in another part of this river valley. So very rich, very, very great gardening. Not too rocky. A lot of that work of taking the rocks out of the fields around here was done by our ancestors, I think. See a lot of rock walls. So overall, pretty good. I inherited a worm colony, vermiculture with the property. And so the person that had worked the property before was really producing incredible dirt, and compost to add to the property, and that's been done for a dozen years. So I'm lucking out in that longevity.
Wow. So you must have wonderful soil, just even without that vermiculture. But yeah, that is fabulous. So you grew up gardening veggies, and what did you pursue for a profession? Was it in horticulture or was it in writing or journalism?
No, yeah, it was really in journalism. In fact, I'm what's called a boomerang. Our parent company here at the Old Farmer's Almanac is Yankee Publishing.
Hmm.
And we have a publication called Yankee Magazine, another old publication. So when I was a bit younger, I started out there, but as an editor, but I did do garden. I did garden and home, food and travel, as well as features. So I had a lot of exposure to gardening content, I guess I would say. And I was always doing it myself. And then I spent 20 years at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, mostly publications, but also the library and also volunteering. We had a beautiful courtyard garden that won many awards. And I learned a lot about perennial gardening there, working as a volunteer there for 15 years and really taking a lot of the plant matter home. So that's more of my non-vegetable gardening. But also there, I belong to one of the country's first biodynamic vegetable farms called Brookfield Farm, and learned a lot there. They use the Almanac principles. Biodynamics a little bit different, more intense than organic, and so I was exposed to that there. And that was a hands-on farm. We did planting, we did picking, we did gleaning, we did all kinds of things, and also a community. So learning knowledge and recipes and things like that. So coming back, yes, I'm a publications person with a hardcore habit, shall we say, in the garden.
And it's so wonderful to be able to marry those two things together.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about how you came to be editor of the Almanac. And I think you are one of the few in the history of the Almanac, even though it's almost, I think, what is it, 235 years it's coming up on?
Yeah, 233.
33,
Yeah.
yes. I was trying to do the math from 1792. I was like, why am I trying to do this math in my head?
Well, it's also confusing because we come out the fall before. So, our
Mhm.
2025 issue just came out, and that's how our founder, Robert B. Thomas, did it. Yes, if you do the math, you'd say like our editorship average is 17 to 18 years, which that's fine with me. I've year one done, but I also, try to point out to people that Robert B was around, I think he was editor for almost 50 years.
Mhm.
So, it was his baby, and we can get into any of that. But yeah, I loved this publication when I worked on the other side of this, really the hallway. And when this job came open, I knew Janice Stillman, who was the editor for 22 years. I even did stories for her. And so when it was time for her to step down, I just was, it's a dream job for me. Like you said, matching your interests. But we're also weather nuts here. That's really the backbone of our business, which is also of great interest to me. And sky watching. Our founder, Robert B. Thomas, was an astronomer. And so we've always included, night sky information because the earliest gardeners also looked to the skies to get an edge in the field.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting things about the almanac is I think people think of it as looking up the weather for harvesting or planting or pruning, but then you have all these other sky charts and you're like, wow, you can really get in. So we'll get into it in a few minutes how to read some of those charts and use them as a home gardener. But I wanted to ask you, what does your day-to-day job entail? So it's not just editing the almanac itself. There are other parts to it.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And so the 14th editor, second female, as you said, and it's interesting. You can find all about our previous editors online, and they really all brought something different to the time that they were publishing in, and also, the editions under their watch. And that's true for me too. I think that one thing that we wanted to return to what my charge has been is, our tagline is useful with a pleasant degree of humor. And we really felt like, some of that fun and quirkiness really could be turned up a notch. And so that's kind of what I've been charged with doing, which isn't so bad either. So what does that look like day to day? Yeah, we've got a staff of 6 amazing editors, and we do the Almanac, which is a full year. We're working hard on 2026 now, as you might imagine, but we also do a full line of calendars. Our gardening calendar is our most popular, but our moon calendar is pretty incredible. Country, weather, all those things that we do. We do planners, we do journals, and we also do handbooks. Like I'm writing right now our houseplant handbook that will come out in 2026. So we've always got a lot of things cooking. Um, and actually, we sometimes have things cooking, which is, people often say, what's the best day of the year? And I would say it's the recipe test day, when we all take the readers' recipes, the top ones, and we all cook them, and then we come and share and we vote. And then we decide on who will make it into the next issue.
Yeah, I've done some like tomato taste and other events as a judge, been invited to things or pie tasting. And I must say, Carol, that it sounds like so fabulous when you're asked. And then when you get there after the third tasting, you're like, oh, I'm kind of done.
Right, right. Too many tomatoes, if there's such a
Yes.
thing.
Or too many of any one thing. You're like, I cannot differentiate anymore.
My tongue is tired.
But yeah, that does sound like it would be a fun get together with coworkers and to share those recipes and experience that. And so the history of the almanac, so it used to be back in the day, pre-internet, this was it. You were out on the farm in the 1800s, 1900s, and you might have a local version of your almanac or other versions, but I think you're the only one still in print today.
There's a couple others, not as
Mm-hmm.
old as us, and they are regional. And yeah, it's really great history. Like you said, maybe when we first started out, you might have the Bible and your almanac. You might not, maybe if you live near a more urban place, you'd get a broadside or a bit of news. But libraries weren't still very prevalent. And so for home reading matter and useful matter, and that's why Robert B was like, this thing has to also be a little entertaining. You need to look at this every day of the year. Every other person's a farmer in those days. But what else can we do to bring people together? And also, I think just create a smile once in a while.
Mm-hmm. And how do you keep it new? Like there's a new in the tagline, and after 230 plus years, how do you get that new in it?
That's such a good question. I think that's really the idea, is that the successful formula has been plenty of the old, the tried and true, and a bunch of the new. Because if I could sum up, I think the how we stay new is we listen to our readers and our, people, our friends online, if you will. It's really, we hear from people on email, phone calls, letters, and they really tell us what's on their minds. People are very much wanting to grow their own food, their own flowers. They want the best, tried and true, but they don't want to miss out on the new. So, how do we do it? Things that make us curious. We're editors of the Almanac. We talk to our people all the time. What are the things out there that, again, bring a smile, but also teach us something, maybe a gee whiz moment, and a little bit more, maybe an inspiration. So yeah, we sit down every so often and talk through ideas, and people pitch us ideas. But I'd say most come from within, because we have that great communication feedback loop with our readers. So yeah, this year we brought out, an example might be our story on hugging. It's called "A Snug as a Bug in a Hug." I had seen a story about bugs hugging, and I thought hugging is something we kind of lost during the pandemic. A lot of elbow bumps, and yet we know, hugs are really good for us. So we just delved into that subject deep, and that's how a story like that might come about, a real curiosity, and then let's go find out.
Yeah, so there are short little paragraph bite-sized pieces like about the trends or a little side thing or facts sprinkled throughout, but then are some longer stories too.
Yes. And the trends, as you said about new, we're all wanting to know. AI is really hitting the growing community, whether it's seeking out weeds and being able to pull those versus a good plant or a very small application of some kind of agent that's needed but much smaller because it can be delivered AI. So we're seeing those kinds of trends, a lot of trends, people really wanting to garden no matter where they are, windowsills, patios, community gardens if they don't have access. So those kind of trends, I think we're all very interested in what's going on with our food system, those sorts of things.
And so let's turn to the almanac itself, to the heart of it, and the calendar pages and how a home gardener might use those. So you have, for each of the pages, there's a left hand and a right hand.
Right. So if you look at October, you're going to find on the left-hand side, we're going to talk to you about the sky. What's up there? What can you see on a night where you've got a clear sky? And also the moon, moon gardening has been, and there's moon gardens, which of course are white gardens,
Hmm.
but then gardening by the moon is really gardening in sync with the moon's phases. So that information you find on the left-hand page, you'll find the sunset and the sunrise. And we have keys also in there so that you can figure out for any location. And just that very simple information, right? That wouldn't have been available. And of course, you can find this on maybe on your device, but maybe not all on the same page, so to speak. On the right hand side, I think of this as really the entertainment part of the book. We have, I think, these just lovely essays, the farmer's calendar for every month, and then we have some inspirational quotes from probably long ago, at the top, and little drawings. But then the calendar is so meaty. You have the day of the week, and you have dates for like if it's a holiday, Yom Kippur. We have the feasts, all the kind of religious feasts or fasts aspects. Those are where you see, as we're talking about, what's the sky doing, and then we have tides, the weather, sort of the weather averages, and then what I love the most is the dog roll. It's this little poem that runs down the right hand side of the calendar.
Yeah, what I'm obsessed with is the sunrise and sunset times
Yes. Yeah. How
because
much time do I have?
yeah, exactly. I'm like, okay, I'm trying to beat this sunset each day and it's getting shorter and shorter. So you're like,
Mhm.
oh, I can't believe how fast this goes. But super important to know. And so maybe we'll go over pretty quickly the theory behind gardening by the moon.
Sure.
And so you're planting during the increase of the moon is behind that theory, basically.
Well, I find the easiest way, this is the simplest way to understand it. If you understand that the moon pulls the tide, right? The
Hmm.
water, the ocean. We are 70% water, plants are 80 to 90% water. So the idea of gardening in sync with the moon is understanding that the moon has an effect on water that we can see and not see. So this idea that in a waxing moon, the light of the moon is increasing. That's a good time to plant things that are coming up above the ground. So if you're germinating, let's say, or you're planting, greens, something that, the food product is above the ground. We talk about wanting to do that when you have the energy on your side. The moon is pulling the water up and up in the ground. So a waxing moon's good for that. A waning moon is better for crops that we want to be that are underground, our root vegetables, or we're transplanting. You're putting your starts in, getting those roots to set is more important. So that's really basically, in a nutshell, what we talk about when we're planting by the moon's phases is really paying attention to what the moon is doing to the water table.
Mhm. I think that's a great way to sum it up. And of course, the charts will help you. And Then there is real life, right, Carol? So you're like, okay, I had that window that it said in the almanac, but
Totally.
I missed it because I was on my summer vacation, or I missed that little window. So what do you advise to people who miss that optimal timing?
Oh, well, I think, it's also good to think about it in context. Our ancestors needed every leg up. They didn't even have short range forecasting. That's half right? So, yeah, the idea that anything, especially having to do, as you said, with frost, or like, how long do I have to garden today? So I think the idea is that it's just a way to give yourself a leg up when you can. And the good news about the moon is that it's happening every month, and it's also about us, it's about, we talk about the new moon time as really time to sort of button things up. Every single month in the garden, there's something to kind of button up and maybe make a plan for, so that's a good time in the moon cycle to do that. Same with, putting new ideas in the ground. That's a waxing moon kind of activity. So again, it's not necessarily just about my putting that seed in the ground or harvesting the potatoes on the day you're supposed to. It's really about trying to find a way to just be more in balance with those phases.
And be more aware. And I think once you start going by the moon cycles, it goes so rapidly, I must say,
So
Carol.
rapidly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're
You
like,
get another
oh,
chance 27
yes.
days later.
You're like, wait, I just did my little full moon, introspective ceremony for myself, maybe writing down what I want to do for the next month ahead or something like that. And then all of a sudden, bam, it's back again.
Exactly.
And where did that time go? GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with you all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
So speaking of some of that folklore and other things that are included in the almanac that are shared, that, gathered wisdom from the decades or centuries past, there are all those phenology signs. So when something happens in nature and coincides with something else, people have observed that over the centuries. Do you have some favorite examples of those?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just lately around here, and we'll get into the forecasts, I think, but we're really calling for a mild winter almost everywhere. And I wasn't surprised to see I've probably seen 6 woolly bear caterpillars in the past week or two, and all of them have the brownest band I've ever seen. They're black on the ends and brown in the middle. And, the folklore of that is that the browner the band, the lengthier that part is, it will be a mild winter. So they are in agreement with our forecast, I'm glad to say. But yeah, I think I like some of the things in the spring, when the forsythia blooms. And of course, if you can work that soil, it's time to put the peas in, things like that. I will say that's where we see, though, that, things can get out of sync. warm springs lead to early blooming, but the birds that need to be there aren't there yet, or the pollinators. So phenology has changed over time. There are different signs. Poison. I've been calling the May month the poison ivy moon around here
Mm-hmm.
because I unfailingly get it at that time, because it's just as happy to be outside as me and in the garden. So I think, we all have them in our lives, and it's just interesting to think about those cyclical signs. Do you have some that you notice?
Yeah, I think there are, you mentioned the forsythia. When that starts to bloom, that means the sap has risen in the plants, and the ground is warmed up enough to do a few things. You can get out
Mm-hmm.
there and start actually gardening or work the soil. And that could vary by, I noticed in the last few years, a couple weeks earlier, a couple weeks later,
Mm-hmm.
depending. But yeah, I think when the fruit trees are blooming or the peach trees, and you think maybe I can actually do something, then we get hit by a late frost.
That's really been the
Hmm.
story. When we talk about overall weather trends, we've got a wavering jet stream, and that has led to some really cold shots in April, getting pretty far south. And that's where we see those fruit crops especially being affected if the blossoms are on the tree.
And then there are things like I have large oak trees on my little urban lot, and there's some mast years where you have
Yes.
tons of tiny acorns, and
Yes.
then other years with hardly anything. And there are lots of fruit trees that do similarly. They might produce a lot in one year and then kind of be a couple years. And so those cycles are interesting to track as well.
Yes, we see that too. Yeah, and pine trees, they'll produce a lot of pine cones when it's their year, and then there'll be very few the next.
Hmm. And it's interesting to try to back source that to figure out, well, was it because there was a warm summer this year, or was it a mild winter last year, or what might have caused those?
Yeah, this year we had a lot of people very, very happy with they felt like they were the best gardener of their lives, especially their hydrangeas were doing really
Mm-hmm.
well. And we are like, well, it's in the word hydrangea. Like, it's a very wet year. So they're
Mm-hmm.
just as happy as can be. But yes, you did all the right things too.
Yep. And I would say in the Mid-Atlantic, we had a very dry year, so
Hmm.
not so great. And then I was
Right.
thinking of one of the other phenology signs that you hear in folklore locally is the American persimmon fruit, the little seeds inside of it. If they have
Yes.
a fork, a knife, or a spoon,
Yes.
um, that could mean different things for that upcoming winter. And I have to say, for the people this year that I've been following online, it's all over the place. Like, some people
Hmm.
are seeing knives, some people are seeing forks, some people are seeing spoons. So I feel like
Oh.
that's probably every year.
Yes, the perplexed persimmon. I heard a
Mm-hmm.
new one actually from a friend in Arkansas who asked me if I'd heard about the blackberry winter.
Mm,
And so they said that after the blackberries bloom, the flower, that means there's going to be one final cold snap, not always an actual frost, but that's what they look for in their area.
interesting, because I have thornless blackberries in my community garden plot, and they have put on almost like a second spring in the last 2 to 3 weeks. I've been getting lots more blackberry flowers and fruits, and they should be pretty much, going to bed right now. But we just
Yeah.
haven't really had those cold nights or much of a cool off, yet. I will say, I'll
Hmm.
use the words yet, but soon. Our average killing frost is usually around November 7th or so for our
Hmm.
region. So sometimes as early as around Halloween, but somewhere in
Hmm.
that first week or so of November. So right now, the forecast, according to the local meteorologist, is, still pretty mild.
Hmm. That's the story.
Hmm. And so for weather predictions for the Mid-Atlantic states this winter, um, what is the almanac showing?
For the Atlantic corridor, we are seeing a winter that's warmer than normal, like
Hmm.
much of the country. Precipitation mostly slightly below normal, though where you are, which is the southern part of what we call the Atlantic corridor, we are calling for above normal snowfall. So that'll be interesting. In fact, very few places are we calling for more snowfall. But cold snaps in our predictions for your area are mid-December, early in late January, and late February. We're saying snow in late December and late February for when that snowfall is going to be the heaviest.
Okay, I'm writing this down right now because I have some travel during those times, and I'm like, that's the only thing I worry about is because we're so not used to snow now. We've had several mild winters of almost no snow that it's going to shut down the place if it snows.
I've been there, and you guys do not know how to do snow.
No, not at all. And we have so many transplants here in the Washington, D.C. area, especially from all over the world. So, it could be their first snow ever for some people.
Yeah.
And for others of us, it's just like, we forgot about that blizzard 9 years ago. That didn't happen. That was an aberration. We don't know how to deal with it again. So it does bring up, people coming from all over the world could find the Almanac useful because, different regions, different planting calendars, but also how things are changing in the last decade or two due to climate change.
For sure. I think that's our biggest story. It sort of touches all of our stories. We don't necessarily say climate change, it's clearly we're in a warming world. Climate is always changing. We're working on a story with our weather team for the 2026 edition about those normals. So, our predictions are largely based on sunspot science along with climatology and meteorology. But this idea that, the whole country and Canada as well is really shifting in those hardiness zones. But we're digging into those new normals. One fact that really surprised me, but sounded very confirming to me, was that everywhere in America is having a warmer December, like almost by a couple of degrees. And April for the northern parts of the country are actually having a longer, like a winter hangover. So we're staying cooler in April up here. So yeah, there's just some trends that you can really look at are affecting everybody.
Yeah, I'm noticing in my vegetable garden, I'm going a couple more weeks longer in the fall and starting a couple weeks earlier in the spring if I want to. You
Well,
don't
that's
have to. Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, I would say, Kathy, that like I moved in June and my plants did better. I was like, oh no, I'm late. But my tomatoes didn't get blight. My peppers were never happier. And I think, yeah, we're all like, okay, the forsythia is blooming. I need to get my hoe in the soil, because there are more rain events, more short-term, heavy rain events. That really affects our gardens. Pathogens can kind of splash up on the leaves, or it just creates a blight condition, whereas it might dry out if you waited till June. So we're seeing that all kinds of growers are adapting to that and maybe not jumping on that earlier temperature boon.
Yeah, and I think the key is the soil temperature. So
Absolutely,
we're not just relying on the air temperature. Oh, I can go out in shirt sleeves, but whether the soil temperature is warm enough for the seed to germinate and for the roots that you plant to expand.
Right. So right.
And then I was going to ask a follow-up on the sunspot science you were talking about. Can you define that?
Sure. So Robert B. Thomas, our founder, he was really an astronomy guy and particularly fascinated with what is sun science, which is looking at the magnetic storms on the sun. So lots of people have been seeing auroras further south than ever before.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
that's a storm on the sun. So, and people may have been reading, we're at the very peak of cycle 25. So for 25 cycles, which are about 11 years long, a cycle, there's tons of great data. People have been sun watching. And so what we do is look at those patterns for weather. Now, it's not like there's a magnetic storm on the sun and we have a hot summer. It doesn't work that way. But what's been happening is we're at this peak of sun activity, and things will start to get less active after this peak period. So that does impact factors that impact our weather, like the jet stream or ocean temperatures or things like that. And so we use the same formula that Robert B. Thomas used. We just have a lot more computing to throw at it.
Interesting. So with those sun super active period that's starting to go away now, are there going to be any changes in our growing situation because of that?
I hope so. I hope we're going to turn to some cooling and less dry. I mean, really, the story has been what you get, you're getting more of. If your area tends to be on the wetter side, it's going to be more wet. That's kind of the things that are happening that we're seeing. Same with if it's hot and dry, it might be a little hotter and a little drier. So, we hope that this peak passing will dissipate some of the extremes that we're seeing. And that's typically been, but of course there's many other factors, right? But the idea that if these storms calm down as they do toward the end and the beginning of a new cycle, we'll see some different weather patterns.
Interesting. So you had alluded earlier to biodynamic farming.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I can. It's a big topic, but it's sort of one step greater than organic farming in that it is organic, but there's other pieces taken into it in terms of crop rotation, building fungal networks in soil to sustain it over time, a real attention to the soil. And there's some woo-woo parts of it, like you take a ram's horn and you move the dirt from one field to the other under the full moon. I probably didn't get that all right. But this idea that there's a real connection with our planets. We're one planet in a sea of them, and that it does impact our soil. But real attention to like the resting fields. When a field is resting, putting livestock on that field, and that idea of biodynamics is caring for the soil holistically. I would say in a simple way to explain it.
And I noticed that too in the Almanac. Of course, we're talking about plants and farming and gardening, but there is animal husbandry and other related farming topics in the Almanac.
Yes, this year we have a story on backyard chickens. We knew that a lot of people were having trouble with egg prices off and on. And that always brings up if somebody's got a spot, like, should I get chickens? Yeah, you should if you love chickens and fresh eggs. That's not necessarily going to save you money, but you're probably going to fall in love with the chickens. And as a gardener, you're really going to love them for their composting and their nitpicking.
There are other side benefits. And as you're talking about the pricing, I was like, that's like the kind of fallacy where we think growing our own tomatoes is going to save us money. But
Right.
It's not about the money, everybody.
No. Nope.
It's about the end product, which is probably going to be a better quality than a lot of what you could buy in the store, and the experience of doing it, of course.
Agreed.
So yeah, I don't think keeping a few chickens is going to save you money on those eggs in the end, because I've seen the price of poultry food.
Right, but you might be really laugh at their antics, which is good for you too.
Exactly. And then again, all the side benefits of having chickens and really their pets.
Yes, so, there you go. Pets with benefits.
Pets with benefits. So I was looking at the cover again of the Almanac, and I see Ben Franklin, who's my personal hero, on there. And I wanted to ask how he interacted or related to the Almanac's founder, Robert B. Thomas. Were they friends, adversaries, competitors?
They didn't really have crossover. I'd have to look at the years, in fact. But Ben Franklin, Robert B. is right with you because he was a big fan, because really Ben Franklin is the father of the American almanac. Now, there were European almanacs. Our people who settled our country from Europe came with them, but they were not American. And so he really started it, and it became its own thing. And then many almanac makers followed suit. And I think Robert B. Thomas felt like, Benjamin Franklin really was the guy who got it right. And he considered himself someone, back then imitation as it is today is the purest form of flattery. But people regularly did copy information and then regionalize it or localize it. So that was a common practice of the time. But I think the idea that we are the existing American Almanac, from the beginning, and we really want to credit him with the American Almanac, I would say, tradition.
Mm-hmm. And so do you have any personal heroes or influences in your career?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. Well, I know that you had Margaret Roach on, and I always enjoy reading her. So for
Mm-hmm.
modern people, I would say, I think about the Foxfire books.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know about those. Those were influential on me as a kid. So I think, and they were written by I won't even remember the family, but they became written by a lot of people, kind of capturing Appalachian and older wisdom. So I was always drawn to things like that. I think local gardeners really inspire me. There's a wonderful farm at Hildene, which is Lincoln's former homestead in Vermont. And I've met with the people there. They have flower gardens, but they have developed a community vegetable garden where they bring the high schoolers in, and they have a high tower, high tunnel and greenhouses, and they can grow food all year. And I think we forget that people don't always have access to fresh food. And so I'm really inspired by people reaching into their communities. Brian, the person who planted the orchard that I'm now tending, this property is super inspiring to me. I'm glad that he is taking time to teach me. I didn't know a lot about, for instance, the working of wood chips and how you can feed fruit trees. Trees eat trees, it turns out. And so I would say pretty much every gardener I find inspiring. If you're the editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac and you admit that to people, they're either like, I kill houseplants, what should I do? Or how do you compost? So I think I find inspiration and especially with beginning gardeners who are so excited. So I know that's not really a great answer, but those are some of the inspirations coming to mind.
Yeah, I can relate, especially that early enthusiasm and bringing that up, because sometimes you are like, I'm a little tired of this, or some
Yeah.
chore or task, and then somebody comes up full of energy, and you're like, oh yeah, this is fun to do. So that's always great to reignite, and also being out there amongst, gardeners learning their techniques and their different ways of planting is always inspirational. And so you were talking about working on the 2026 edition already of the Almanac. What new things are in the pipeline?
Oh gosh. Well, let's see. What can I can't give away everything, but I think we see a lot of people wanting to know about pollinators,
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to those in their garden. So we have some tips around that. I think we're seeing a lot more of people that want to garden in small spaces. So we are talking about that in that issue. Definitely the weather trends that we're seeing overall now that all of those normals have been figured out. I think a really fun story my colleague is doing. We do have this chart called the best days, and it's based on moon signs, moon phases, and also astrology. And he decided to do things all year long according to the best days chart. So it's like, on January 5th to cut your hair for growth, or like mow your lawn on this day to reduce growth. So he's been doing them all year, and he's going to report on that in the 26th issue, which I think is just going to be a blast, and people will be entertained and also find it useful.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear how that worked out. And hopefully it was like all in timing, and
Right.
and we'll have to see how that works. So how can our listeners contact you or to find out more?
Sure. So if they have a printed copy of the almanac, we have our phone number right there, and we do answer calls as best that we can. Another great way is reaching out through almanac.com. There's our email query desk, but also people leave comments on our different articles and posts, and we typically try to see if we can answer those or respond. So those are all good ways. We are lucky in that we run a reader contest for essays and for recipes. So we love it when people send us those. So more the merrier on that front. So any of those ways work.
Great. So Carol, any final thoughts or features of the Almanac that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I think, people that love the print issue love it. It's kind of fun that it's not that much bigger than a phone these days. It gives you a ton of information right at your fingertips that you don't have to actually, type anything in, which is sort of neat. But I think that people also really enjoy almanac.com, which is thousands of free pages of growing information, weather, gardening. But the tools, I think, are really cool. Like you were saying, how do you use these charts and whatnot? Well, you can just type in your zip code and get our planting table for your area based on frost averages. So when can I plant my peas and corn, and when do I have to harvest things? That's all there. Also, 60-day forecasts and snapshots of our long range are available by zip code. So those are just, and night sky viewing as well. So if you know your zip code, you can get a lot of fun, handy information on our website.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thank you, Kathy. This was great fun.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the genius ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Stokesia plant profile. Stokes Aster, Stokesia laevis, is a perennial plant with white, pinkish, blue, or purple flowers that bloom from summer into early fall. The flowers resemble thistles, but are much fluffier. The dark green foliage is evergreen. It is hardy to USDA zones 5 to 9. It's native to North Carolina through to Louisiana. Its native habitat is in the coastal plains, bogs, pine savanna, and open woodlands. It attracts butterflies and bumblebees. Stokes Aster does best in full to part sun in moist, acidic soils with good drainage. It is somewhat deer and rabbit resistant. Remove spent flowers to prolong the bloom season. Other than that, this plant is extremely low maintenance. You can propagate it by dividing Stokesia clumps in spring or fall. Available cultivars include Blue Danube, Rosia, and Silver Moon. Stokesia, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, my Encore azaleas are reblooming. Over at the community garden plot, the potato plants are popping up out of the blue, and I think because they think this is a second spring. So we've had very mild temperatures for the past week and still no rain. In the garden tips that we shared this past week on our Facebook page and to our Google group, we advise that you keep watering, especially newly planted shrubs and trees. It will be a while until we make up this drought deficit that we are in. You can begin mulching your perennials after the first hard freeze when it comes, typically around mid-November in our region. The freezing and thawing of the soil in winter can cause many perennials to heave or push their root balls out of the ground. Mulching helps moderate temperature fluctuations and reduces this problem. You can cut your garden herbs and hang them to dry in a cool, dry place with good air circulation. Once they're dry, in about a week or so, You can crumble them and store them in jars. Finally, you can pot up your amaryllis bulbs with at least the top quarter or third of the bulb above the surface of the soil to avoid water collections at the top sprout. Also, there shouldn't be more than about an inch of space between the bulb and the interior side of the pot. Amaryllis flower better when the roots are pot bound. Then place the pot on a heating pad to encourage earlier growth and blooming. If you're on Facebook, please join us on the Garden Podcast Facebook group. This is open and free to anybody to join. You can post your favorite garden podcast episodes there and check out other recommendations that others post. And please share that group with any other gardeners you know on Facebook. In local gardening events, the Potomac Rose Society is hosting an online talk on Sunday, November 17th, and that is free and open to anyone. You can register for that at potomacriose.org/events. And a floral designer will be demonstrating how to make holiday table floral designs featuring garden roses. So definitely sign up for that. On Monday, November 18th, the Silver Spring Garden Club is hosting a talk on Unearthing the Hidden World, the Rhizosphere, all about the earth surrounding plant roots and the web of microscopic life that is down at that level. So much is undiscovered, and the mystery will be revealed by our speaker, Louise Clark. That meeting is in person at Brookside Gardens. It starts at 7:30 p.m. and takes place in the Visitor Center building auditorium. You can find out more about that at silverspringgardenclub.com. And then finally, on November 23rd, which is a Saturday at 10 a.m. at Mount Cuba in Delaware, they are holding an in-person program on the late season perennials for wildlife. Take an in-depth look at how plants that add fall and winter interest to the home garden also serve as lifelines for local wildlife, and that will be followed by a tour of the gardens. So you can find out more about that and register for it at mountcubacenter.org. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with the last word from greenprints.com in a season of thankfulness and cranberry sauce. As Thanksgiving approaches, I am reminded of how precious time with my extended family truly is. I also realize how incredibly blessed I am, even though it can be a bit trying at times. It never fails that with so many of us, discussions, some of them very enthusiastic, are bound to occur. Each Thanksgiving comes the biggest debate of them all, cranberry sauce. The debate is as varied as the cranberry sauce itself. Some people swear by the tangy, textured whole berry sauce, while others champion the smooth, sweet jelly variety. And then there are those, like me, who simply pass on the cranberry sauce entirely. Despite the clear preferences, this cranberry conundrum has become a beloved tradition in my family, one that brings a unique flavor to our holiday gatherings. Have you ever wondered where cranberry sauce got its start? Well, I did. It all started a century ago when cranberry grower Marcus Urin began selling canned cranberry sauce to make use of surplus and damaged berries. This ingenious solution turned cranberries into a year-round treat and solidified their places on our holiday tables. Yet, despite this historic evolution, the cranberry sauce debate remains as spirited as ever. Every year, our holiday dinner table becomes a battleground of taste preferences. My grandmother, a steadfast purist, insists on serving her homemade whole berry cranberry sauce. To her, the small bursts of tartness and the vibrant texture are not just a side dish, but a labor of love. She takes pride in the way she gently simmers the cranberries with sugar and a hint of orange zest, creating a sauce that's both visually stunning and deliciously nostalgic. For her, anything less than homemade is simply unacceptable. In stark contrast stands my dad, who has deep-seated fondness for a gelled cranberry sauce straight from the can. The smooth, uniform texture and the way it retains the shape of the can are just how he likes it. It's a taste of childhood for him, evoking memories of family dinners where the familiar shape and taste of the jellied cranberry sauce were as much a part of the meal as the turkey itself. To him, the jellied sauce is non-negotiable. The rest of us, the self-proclaimed cranberry skeptics, find ourselves caught in the middle. I am firmly in this camp. Despite the passionate pleas from both sides to give cranberry sauce another chance, I remain consistent in my aversion. The vibrant red sauce, whether whole berry or jellied, just doesn't appeal to me. Each year, as the cranberry debate unfolds, I sit back and watch the back and forth with a bemused smile, content to remain a cranberry cynic. Yet, it's not just the debate that makes this tradition special. It's the way it brings our family together. The lively discussions about which cranberry sauce is superior are punctuated by laughter and playful banter. It's a reminder that while we may have differing tastes, the real joy of the season lies in our shared moments around the table. The cranberry sauce debate, in all its intensity, becomes a symbol of our family's love and unity. So when you gather around your own holiday table this season, which side will you choose? Will you champion the tangy whole berry sauce, embrace the nostalgic jellied variety, or join the ranks of those who simply don't understand the fuss? No matter your preference, remember that these debates, these little differences, are what make our gatherings memorable and heartwarming. After all, it's not just about the cranberry sauce. It's about the shared laughter, the cherished memories, and the love that binds us together during this special time of year. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at greenprints.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.